The river never chooses who deserves to live. It only remembers who was brave enough to reach into the ice. The first cry drifted across the frozen valley so softly that Claire Bennett almost believed the wind had imagined it. She stopped beside the snow-covered pines, her basket of winter herbs hanging from one arm, and listened again. Nothing but the distant groan of ice stretching beneath the weight of another bitter January morning. The old trail was nearly buried under fresh snow, and the gray hollow river had become a wide ribbon of white that looked solid enough to fool anyone unfamiliar with mountain winters. Claire pulled her worn wool coat tighter around her shoulders and took another cautious step before hearing it again. A weak, trembling whine unlike any sound she had ever heard. It wasn't human. It wasn't quite wolf either. It was fear. Real fear. Her boots crunched across the frozen bank as she followed the sound toward a section where the ice had fractured into jagged sheets. Beneath the cloudy surface, something enormous struggled against the dark water. A giant white wolf. Its thick fur shimmered beneath the ice while exhausted golden eyes searched desperately toward the morning light. Claire's breath caught. The animal was far larger than any wolf she had ever seen, nearly the size of a draft horse, yet it made no attempt to threaten her. It simply fought to breathe as freezing water pulled it lower with every passing second. Common sense whispered that she should run back to the village. Every child in Gray Hollow had grown up hearing stories about monstrous wolves that roamed the northern forests during the harshest winters. The elders warned that even looking into their eyes invited disaster. But as Claire stared into those fading amber eyes, she saw no monster. She saw someone losing a battle no living creature deserved to lose. She dropped her basket into the snow without another thought. Grabbing a fallen pine branch nearly 8 feet long, she crawled onto the safest section of ice she could find, spreading her weight exactly as her late father had once taught her. The frozen surface groaned beneath her elbows. Tiny cracks stretched outward like spider webs. The wolf tried to move toward her, but exhaustion dragged it deeper beneath the water. "Don't fight it," Claire whispered, her voice trembling from the cold. "Just trust me." She extended the branch until its end reached the wolf's shoulder. For one terrifying second, nothing happened. Then the giant animal gathered the last of its strength, pressing against the wood, while Claire leaned backward with everything she had. The ice screamed. Her gloves slipped. Freezing water splashed across her sleeves as the branch bent under impossible weight. Every muscle in her body burned, but inch by inch the enormous wolf rose from the black water until its front paws finally reached solid ice. Claire pulled again, gasping through frozen breaths, refusing to let go until the animal collapsed safely beside her. The wolf barely moved, its chest rising in slow, exhausted breaths while crystals of ice clung to its silver-white fur. Relief washed through Claire, but it lasted only a heartbeat. Somewhere farther downstream, carried through the endless white silence, another desperate cry echoed across the frozen river. Claire closed her eyes for one grateful breath, believing the impossible rescue had finally ended, until the lonely cry echoed again through the frozen valley. It came from farther downstream, carried by the sharp winter wind that swept across the endless sheet of ice. She looked back at the giant wolf lying motionless beside the riverbank. Its breathing remained shallow but steady, and although its golden eyes were still open, they seemed to urge her forward rather than ask her to stay. Claire hurried along the frozen shoreline, her boots slipping over packed snow as the sound guided her around a bend where the river narrowed between towering cliffs. There, beneath another fractured layer of ice, a second massive wolf struggled against the freezing current. Its dark, gray coat blended almost perfectly with the water, making it nearly invisible until it lifted its head. Claire did not hesitate this time. She searched for another fallen branch, crawled carefully across the cracking surface, and reached toward the exhausted animal exactly as she had before. Every movement demanded more strength than she thought remained inside her, but somehow the wolf found enough strength to push while she pulled with every ounce of determination she possessed. Minutes later, the second giant wolf collapsed beside the first, shivering as icy water dripped from its thick fur. Before Claire could catch her breath, another distant cry answered from somewhere beyond the cliffs. Then another. Her heart sank. They were not alone. One by one she followed each desperate call. Every rescue became harder than the last. Some wolves were trapped beneath heavy slabs of broken ice. Others had become tangled between fallen trees, frozen into the river. Several were so exhausted they barely reacted when she reached them, forcing Claire to encourage them with quiet words while pulling against impossible weight. Her gloves became soaked until they froze stiff around her fingers. Her boots filled with icy water that numbed her feet with every step. Her shoulders burned, her hands trembled, and her breathing grew ragged in the bitter air. Yet every time she considered resting, another frightened cry reached her ears. By late afternoon, 8 enormous wolves rested together beneath a cluster of snow-covered pines. They remained strangely calm around her, watching silently as if they understood every sacrifice she had made for them. Claire found herself wondering who these extraordinary creatures truly were. They carried themselves with remarkable dignity even while exhausted, and none of them showed the wild aggression the villagers always feared. Instead, they waited quietly while she searched the frozen landscape again. The 9th wolf lay nearly hidden beneath a shelf of ice. The 10th had drifted into shallow water beside a fallen cedar. The 11th had become trapped where the current forced chunks of ice together like the closing jaws of a giant trap. Each rescue stole a little more of Claire's remaining strength. As sunset painted the snow with pale shades of gold and lavender, she leaned against a frost-covered boulder, barely able to steady her shaking hands. 11 giant wolves now rested behind her, alive because she had refused to abandon them. She whispered a grateful prayer that no more cries would come. The valley answered with silence for several long seconds. Then, somewhere far beyond the winding river where the mountains disappeared into gathering twilight, a single deep call echoed through the frozen wilderness. It was lower than all the others, powerful even through exhaustion, and something about that voice sent an unfamiliar shiver through Claire's heart as she forced herself to stand one more time. Claire followed the final cry until the river curved into a forgotten canyon where towering walls of stone blocked the last rays of daylight. The air felt even colder there, and the silence carried a strange weight that made every breath seem louder than the one before it. She climbed over snow-covered rocks, her legs trembling from exhaustion, until the frozen river widened into a broad sheet of pale ice. At first she saw nothing. Then the surface beneath her feet shimmered with a faint silver glow hidden beneath layers of frost. She brushed away fresh snow with her gloved hand and froze. Far below the ice rested the largest wolf she had ever imagined. It was enormous, nearly twice the size of the others she had rescued throughout the day. Its thick silver fur floated gently beneath the dark water, like moonlight trapped beneath crystal. Heavy iron chains wrapped around its front legs and stretched toward ancient stone anchors buried beneath the frozen riverbed. Claire stared in disbelief. Wild animals did not wear chains. Someone had placed them there. The realization sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the weather. The giant wolf slowly opened its eyes. Unlike the warm golden eyes of the others, these were bright silver, calm and unwavering despite the freezing water surrounding it. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other through the cloudy ice. Claire expected fear or anger. Instead, she saw patience, almost as though the creature had already accepted whatever fate waited beneath the frozen river. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "I will not leave you here." She searched the shoreline until she found the thickest fallen pine branch she could lift. Every muscle protested as she dragged it across the snow and carefully crawled onto the ice once again. Tiny cracks appeared beneath her weight immediately, spreading farther than they had during any of the previous rescues. She knew the frozen surface might not hold both of them, but turning back was no longer possible. Inch by inch, she reached the branch toward the narrow opening where freezing water touched the winter air. The giant wolf remained perfectly still until the end of the branch finally reached its shoulder. Then, with slow, deliberate effort, it pressed upward. Claire leaned backward with every ounce of strength left inside her body. The branch bent sharply. The ice groaned beneath her knees. Water splashed across her coat as the enormous weight slowly rose toward the surface. She pulled again, gasping through frozen breaths, refusing to surrender even as her arms shook uncontrollably. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed across the canyon. The sheet of ice beneath Claire shifted several inches. She slipped forward, catching herself just before sliding into the freezing water. For one terrifying heartbeat, she thought everything had been lost. Then the giant wolf surged upward with the last of its remaining strength, breaking free from beneath the fractured ice, while Claire stumbled backward onto solid snow. The massive creature collapsed only a few feet away, its silver coat covered with glittering frost as quiet breaths escaped into the evening air. Claire sank to her knees, too exhausted to stand, watching the mysterious wolf rest peacefully beneath the first stars of the night. As she looked closer, she noticed something partially hidden beneath the damp silver fur near its shoulder. It was not a wound. It was the edge of an ancient symbol unlike anything she had ever seen before. Night settled over Gray Hollow long before Claire reached the abandoned shepherd cabin hidden among the pines. The small wooden shelter had not welcomed visitors for years, but its roof still held against the wind, and the old stone fireplace still waited beneath a layer of dust. One by one, she guided the exhausted wolves inside the fenced pasture beside the cabin, speaking softly so they would not waste what little strength remained. None of them resisted. They followed her with quiet trust that felt almost impossible after everything they had endured. Claire gathered fallen branches until her arms could barely lift another piece of wood, then coaxed a warm fire to life. Orange light flickered across the frozen walls while the bitter cold slowly retreated from the room. She filled an iron pot with fresh snow, melted it over the flames, and mixed warm water with dried mountain herbs she had collected that morning. It had been meant for the village healer, but now every leaf belonged to the 12 silent visitors fate had placed in her path. She moved from one wolf to the next, gently cleaning ice from their thick coats and checking each paw for hidden injuries caused by the frozen river. Some closed their eyes as though finally able to rest. Others quietly watched every movement she made, never once showing fear or aggression. When she reached the giant silver wolf, she paused. Even lying still, it seemed to command the entire room without making a sound. The strange symbol she had noticed beneath its shoulder was hidden once again beneath damp silver fur, almost as though it had never existed. Claire brushed the fur aside carefully, expecting to see it again, but only smooth white skin remained beneath the thick coat. She frowned, wondering if exhaustion had tricked her eyes. The silver wolf slowly lifted its head and looked directly at her. Its calm silver eyes reflected the firelight with quiet intelligence. For a brief moment, Claire felt as though someone was studying her instead of the other way around. She smiled anyway and placed a bowl of warm water within easy reach. "You are safe now," she whispered. "That is all that matters." The giant wolf lowered its head again without drinking, but its steady gaze never left her until she stepped away. Outside, the winter wind howled through the forest while heavy snow continued falling over the mountains. Claire realized she had nothing left to feed 12 enormous wolves except a few dried venison strips stored in the old cabin. Without hesitation, she divided the food into 12 equal portions, leaving none for herself. Hunger could wait until morning. Their recovery could not. Long after midnight, exhaustion finally overcame her. She wrapped herself in a faded wool blanket and drifted to sleep beside the fireplace. Sometime before dawn, an icy breeze slipped through the cracked wooden door, but it never reached her. The 12 wolves had quietly risen during the night. Without a single growl or command, they formed a perfect circle around the sleeping Omega, their massive bodies shielding her from every draft of winter air. Standing closest to her was the giant silver wolf, watching the dark forest beyond the cabin with silent, unwavering focus, as though it had accepted a duty no one had ever asked it to carry. Morning arrived beneath a sky of pale silver clouds, and for the first time in many winters, Claire Bennett woke without the sound of lonely wind filling the empty cabin. Instead, she found 12 enormous wolves resting peacefully around the fading fire, their breathing slow and steady after the impossible journey through the frozen river. For a brief moment, she simply smiled, grateful that every one of them had survived the night. She stepped outside with a wooden bucket to collect fresh water from a nearby spring that remained unfrozen beneath layers of smooth stone. The mountain air bit at her cheeks, but sunlight had begun to soften the endless blanket of snow covering the valley. As she returned to the cabin, she noticed something unusual. The wolves were already awake, yet none of them rushed toward the food or water she carried. They waited patiently until she entered the yard before quietly gathering around her. Their discipline felt almost impossible for wild animals. Each movement appeared deliberate, calm, and respectful, as though they were following silent rules known only to them. Claire laughed softly to herself. "You all have better manners than most people in Grey Hollow," she said while setting down the bucket. Several tails gently brushed across the snow, and she could have sworn one of the younger wolves tilted its head as though amused by her words. Throughout the morning she continued, caring for them, replacing frozen bedding with fresh pine branches and brushing thick layers of ice from their coats. Their strength returned far more quickly than she expected. Some could already walk with confidence around the fenced pasture. Others explored the quiet clearing before always returning to the cabin without wandering into the forest. Yet one wolf remained different from the rest. The giant silver wolf rarely moved unless Claire approached. Whenever she carried water, gathered firewood, or stepped beyond the cabin fence, it silently followed several yards behind, never crowding her, never demanding attention, simply remaining close enough to watch. At first, Claire thought it was still too weak to travel farther. By afternoon, she realized something else. Every time a tree branch cracked in the distance or an unfamiliar sound echoed through the mountains, the silver wolf calmly placed itself between her and the source before relaxing again when no danger appeared. The behavior puzzled her. She had rescued every wolf equally, yet only this one seemed determined to guard her. While cleaning the thick fur along its shoulder with a dry cloth, Claire noticed the mysterious mark again. For only an instant, a faint silver crest shimmered beneath the damp fur, formed by elegant lines unlike any family symbol she had ever seen. Before she could study it more closely, the image faded as though swallowed by the light itself. She blinked in confusion, wondering if fatigue still clouded her vision. The silver wolf slowly lifted its head, meeting her eyes with calm patience before looking toward the distant mountains. Claire followed its gaze. Far across the snowy valley, tiny figures appeared against the white landscape, moving steadily along the old northern trail. Even from that distance, she could tell they traveled together with purpose. The silver wolf remained perfectly still, but every other wolf quietly rose to its feet at the exact same moment, forming another silent circle around the cabin, while the peaceful morning slowly gave way to a feeling that someone, somewhere, had finally begun searching for what had been lost. The distant figures grew larger. As the afternoon sun drifted behind thick winter clouds, Claire counted 6 riders wrapped in heavy cloaks moving carefully along the northern trail, followed by several pack horses carrying supplies instead of weapons drawn for battle. Their steady pace suggested they had traveled for days without stopping. Even before they reached the clearing, every wolf inside the pasture had quietly risen to its feet. None of them growled. None of them paced with fear. They simply watched the approaching strangers with complete attention, as though recognizing something Claire could neither see nor understand. The giant silver wolf stepped forward until it stood just outside the cabin door, placing itself between Claire and the open valley. She smiled gently and rested one hand against its thick shoulder. "It is all right," she whispered. "Maybe they are only travelers who lost their way." The wolf slowly turned its silver eyes toward her. There was no panic in its expression, only quiet patience, almost as if it wished it could explain why these visitors mattered. Moments later, the riders stopped several yards from the wooden fence. Their leader, an older man with silver hair beneath a dark hood, removed his gloves before speaking. "Miss," he called politely, "we mean no harm. We have been searching these mountains since the great storm 3 nights ago. Have you seen any unusual tracks near the river?" Claire hesitated. She glanced toward the wolves behind her, expecting them to retreat into the trees, but none of them moved. They remained perfectly calm, standing together with remarkable discipline. "I found several wolves trapped beneath the ice," she answered honestly. "They were freezing, so I brought them here to recover." The travelers exchanged surprised glances. One younger rider took an involuntary step forward before the older man quietly lifted a hand, asking him to remain where he stood. His thoughtful eyes slowly examined each wolf until they rested upon the giant silver one. For the briefest instant, unmistakable relief softened his weathered face before he carefully hid the emotion. "You rescued all of them yourself?" he asked. Claire nodded with quiet embarrassment. "They needed help. I could not leave them there." Silence settled across the clearing. Snowflakes drifted lazily through the cold air while none of the visitors spoke. Finally, the older traveler lowered his head slightly, not as a formal bow, but with genuine respect. "Compassion like yours has become rare," he said. "You have done something extraordinary, whether you realize it or not." Before Claire could ask what he meant, another sound echoed through the valley. It was not the wind. It was the distant ringing of iron bells carried across the mountains from somewhere beyond the forest. The older man's expression changed immediately. He turned toward the sound with growing concern. "We must leave," he said quietly to his companions. "They are closer than expected." Without another explanation, the riders climbed back onto their horses. Before departing, the older traveler looked once more toward the giant silver wolf. Their eyes met for only a heartbeat, yet something unspoken seemed to pass between them. Then the riders disappeared into the falling snow as quickly as they had arrived. Claire stood in confused silence, wondering why complete strangers would search endlessly for wolves, speak to them with hidden respect, and leave without asking for a single one in return. Behind her, the giant silver wolf slowly lifted its head toward the darkening sky, and for the first time since she had rescued it from the frozen river, the fading light revealed the faint outline of the mysterious silver crest beneath its shoulder before it disappeared once again. The first full moon since the great storm climbed slowly above the mountain peaks, covering the quiet clearing with soft silver light. Claire stood outside the cabin with a bucket of fresh water, admiring how peacefully the wolves rested beneath the ancient pines. Their coats no longer carried the dull weight of exhaustion. Instead, every strand of fur reflected the moonlight with a faint glow that she had never seen before. The giant silver wolf stepped away from the others and walked toward the center of the clearing. It paused beneath the open sky, lifting its head as though listening to a voice carried only by the wind. One after another, the remaining 11 wolves quietly followed, forming a perfect circle around it without hesitation. Claire frowned with curiosity. During the past 2 days, she had learned to recognize many of their habits, but this was different. Every movement appeared ceremonial, deliberate, and filled with silent purpose. Even the forest seemed to hold its breath. No branches swayed. No birds sang. Only the pale light of the moon continued to brighten the snow beneath their feet. Then the mysterious silver crest beneath the giant wolf's shoulder appeared again. This time it did not fade. Fine lines of glowing light spread gracefully across its thick silver coat, like the branches of an ancient tree reaching toward the stars. The same gentle radiance appeared beneath the fur of every other wolf, each carrying a unique crest that shimmered for only a heartbeat before growing brighter. Claire instinctively stepped backward, not from fear, but from complete astonishment. Warm light surrounded the clearing, peaceful and steady, carrying none of the danger the old village stories had always described. The wolves remained perfectly calm as the silver glow wrapped around them like flowing ribbons of moonlight. Before Claire's amazed eyes, the light slowly lifted, revealing not 12 wild creatures, but 12 people standing where the wolves had been only moments before. They wore elegant winter clothing marked with finely crafted silver emblems that matched the glowing crests she had glimpsed beneath their fur. Each carried themselves with quiet confidence, yet every one of them looked toward the tallest man standing at the center of the circle before moving another step. His long silver hair rested against a dark cloak embroidered with the same royal symbol Claire had seen beneath the ice. His calm silver eyes were exactly the same eyes that had met hers through the frozen river. Claire could barely find her voice. "It was you," she whispered. The man offered a respectful bow instead of speaking immediately. Around him, the other 11 individuals also lowered their heads toward Claire with equal sincerity. None of them carried expressions of pride or superiority. Instead, there was unmistakable gratitude. The silver-haired man finally raised his eyes to meet hers. "My name is Adrian Ashford," he said with quiet warmth. "I am the Alpha King of the Northern Realm." Claire stood frozen in disbelief as every strange moment of the past several days suddenly began fitting together. The discipline of the wolves, the mysterious crest, the respectful travelers, the ancient chains beneath the ice. Before she could gather another thought, the older traveler she had met that afternoon emerged quietly from the edge of the forest with the same companions behind him. This time, without hesitation, All 6 travelers knelt respectfully before Adrian. Claire realized with a racing heart that the last wolf she had rescued had never been an ordinary wolf at all. Without knowing his name, his title, or his kingdom, she had reached into the frozen river and saved a king. Claire could not move as the impossible truth settled over the quiet clearing. The 12 people standing before her had been the wolves she had pulled from the frozen river with nothing more than determination and compassion. The silver-haired Alpha King stepped closer, his calm expression carrying the same quiet strength she had seen in his silver eyes beneath the ice. "You owe me no apology for not recognizing us," Adrian Ashford said gently. "You saw lives in danger. That was all that mattered to you." Claire lowered her eyes, still trying to understand everything that had happened. "I only did what anyone should have done." A faint smile appeared on Adrian's face. "No," he answered. "Many people passed that river after the storm. Some saw the broken ice. Others saw the tracks. None of them chose to stop." His words were followed by respectful silence from the 11 royal guardians standing behind him. The older traveler who had visited the cabin earlier stepped forward and bowed once again. "Your Majesty, our scouts confirmed what we feared." The ancient restraints beneath the river were placed there deliberately. Someone expected the current and the storm to hide what happened. Adrian nodded thoughtfully, but his attention returned almost immediately to Claire. "Before we discover who is responsible, another truth must be made clear." He turned toward the royal guardians. "Bring the villagers." Less than an hour later, several people from Grey Hollow arrived at the clearing after following the riders through the forest. Among them were neighbors who had often ignored Claire, merchants who barely acknowledged her in the marketplace, and elders who believed in Omega should remain unseen whenever important matters were discussed. They stopped the moment they recognized the elegant strangers surrounding the cabin. Confusion quickly became astonishment as they realized the visitors wore the royal crest of the Northern Realm. No one spoke. Adrian calmly faced the gathering crowd. "Who owns this cabin?" he asked. An elderly shepherd stepped forward. "It has stood empty for years, Your Majesty." Adrian nodded. "Then who cared for my guardians while they recovered?" Every eye slowly turned toward Claire. She looked down awkwardly, wishing the attention would disappear. Adrian continued in the same steady voice. "Who gathered firewood while the mountains froze? Who shared food without expecting payment? Who crossed dangerous ice 12 separate times because strangers needed help?" Silence answered every question. Finally, the older village elder removed his cap and lowered his head. Others quietly followed. Their gestures were not driven by fear, but by the uncomfortable realization that they had overlooked the kindness of someone they had underestimated for years. Adrian stepped beside Claire instead of standing above her. "Titles did not inspire her courage," he said. "She believed every life deserved a chance before she knew whose life she was saving. That is the kind of character every kingdom should honor." The winter wind drifted gently through the clearing, carrying away the last traces of doubt. For the first time since Claire could remember, the people of Grey Hollow looked at her without pity or dismissal. They looked at her with genuine respect, while the Alpha King remained quietly at her side, making it unmistakably clear that the greatest act of nobility in the valley had not come from a throne, but from the compassionate heart of the young Omega who had refused to leave anyone behind. The following morning arrived with clear blue skies, and sunlight stretched across the valley until every patch of snow sparkled like scattered crystal. Grey Hollow looked unchanged from a distance, yet Claire Bennett sensed that everything had quietly become different. The people who had once walked past her without a second glance now greeted her with warm smiles. Children waved as she crossed the village square, and neighbors who had rarely spoken before offered baskets of fresh bread, firewood, and winter supplies. Claire accepted every gift with gentle gratitude, although she knew kindness given freely meant far more than anything wrapped in cloth or carried in wooden carts. By midday, Adrian Ashford stood once again beside the frozen river where their paths had first crossed. The ancient chains that had once held him beneath the ice had already been removed, leaving only clear water flowing peacefully beneath the winter sun. Claire joined him at the riverbank, looking across the place where she had nearly exhausted every ounce of strength she possessed without ever knowing whose life rested beneath the frozen surface. Adrian smiled quietly. "Do you know why I came here instead of returning directly to my kingdom?" Claire shook her head. He looked toward the slow-moving water before answering. Because this river reminds me that destiny rarely announces itself with crowns or titles. Sometimes it appears as a simple choice made by an ordinary heart. Claire lowered her eyes with a small smile. I still believe anyone would have tried to help. Adrian looked at her with the same calm silver eyes that had first met hers beneath the ice. Perhaps they would have helped one stranger. Perhaps even two. You crossed that frozen river 12 times. His voice remained gentle, yet every word carried quiet truth. You gave every life the same value before you knew who any of us were. That cannot be taught by power. It comes from character. For a few peaceful moments, neither of them spoke. Snow drifted lazily from the pine branches while the river continued its endless journey through the valley. Finally, Adrian reached into the pocket of his dark cloak and removed a finely crafted silver pendant shaped like the ancient crest Claire had glimpsed beneath his shoulder. He placed it carefully in her hands. "This is not a reward," he said softly. "It is a promise. Wherever this crest is recognized, you will always have a home within the Northern Realm." Claire traced the elegant design with her fingertips before looking back toward the mountains. She realized the greatest gift she had received was not royal recognition, nor the respect of the village, nor even the friendship standing beside her. It was the certainty that compassion could change lives in ways no one could ever predict. As the afternoon light settled over Grey Hollow, Adrian and the 11 royal guardians prepared to begin their journey home. Before leaving, the Alpha King paused, turned toward Claire, and placed one hand over his heart in a gesture of sincere respect. Claire returned the gesture with a grateful smile, watching them disappear beyond the snow-covered pines until only their footprints remained. Winter would eventually fade, the river would thaw, and countless seasons would pass. But the people of Grey Hollow would never forget that the bravest soul in their valley had not worn a crown, carried a title, or possessed great power. She had simply looked beneath the frozen surface, seen 12 strangers in need, and chosen kindness before she knew that one of them was a king.